He couldn't stop feeling that something hid in that darkness he couldn't see, but others could.
Welcome to The Storming Journey, a sacred text reading of The Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. This podcast may contain spoilers for the Stormlight Archive through Wind and Truth.
Welcome to The Storming Journey. I'm Adam, and I'm today's Ardent, and we will be covering Chapter 30 of The Way of Kings, which is titled Darkness Unseen.
I'm Elle, and I'm today's Worldsinger.
I'm Liz, and I'll be your Veristitalian.
So our theme for this episode is Equivocate, and to be completely honest, I think most of us equivocate a lot in our daily lives. But I don't have any particularly interesting life stories about them. However, equivocation humor is one of my favorite forms of humor, in that equivocation is like using words to kind of like obscure what you mean. And equivocation humor often relies on like using a word with one definition in using a word with two definitions in multiple ways that are funny. So I found a list of jokes about equivocation humor jokes. I wanted to pull up the ones I found with my Tumblr analysis of things, but I can't find my paper I did on Tumblr humor, which bums me out so much. So one of them is I lost my job at the orange juice factory because I just couldn't concentrate. Or the one from Mary Poppins where it's I know a man with a wooden leg named Smith. Oh, really? What's the name of his other leg? Or I think a couple episodes ago, I talked about my absolute favorite joke is a man walks into a bar, the third one ducks. And I love this kind of humor because it's just I think it's funny. I really like wordplay, and this is a form of wordplay. And we're going to be talking about how equivocation is negative and not helpful and kind of is not great to productive conversations, but I think there are also ways that equivocation is funny and can be used for humor in a positive way. So that's my very brief world singing for today.
Okay, and I have our Storm's Eye view of the chapter. So here's what happens in this chapter. Kaladin has succeeded at winning over the men of Bridge 4. They're joking, laughing, and even going out drinking with each other, practicing bridge carries together like a real team. However, Kaladin is still worried about the sustainability of their high casualty rate. So he comes up with a plan to save more bridgemen by carrying the bridge on its side as a shield. From Gaz's perspective, this crazy idea seems like the perfect way to get Kaladin killed in battle, as his superior Lamoral has asked. Gaz gives Kaladin permission to try the side carry on their next plateau assault.
That was a really great world see and Storm's Eye, so thank you both. So as you know now, dear listener, we are using the theme of equivocate, which the definition for equivocate is to use ambiguous language so as to conceal the truth or avoid committing oneself to something. And sometimes I like to pick weird words for my themes, as you probably know by now, words that I don't fully use properly because I am a user of the English language that does not use words according to their dictionary definition. But that's why I gave the definition for equivocate, because I didn't know it when I first found the word. But at the same time, I was trying to find a word for this theme, and I was going over I was thinking about how in the chapter Kaladin and Gaz are both cautious, and I was they're playing it very close to the vest, right? Kaladin doesn't tell the people why they're doing the bridge carry. Gaz doesn't tell everything, and they're really they're trying to obscure some of their intentions and things like that. And so, going down a nice little word trail of going to Merriam-Webster, and then going to the synonyms for the word, and then going to the antonyms for the word, and doing all those fun things. And Elle is over here smiling, going, yeah, words. I came across the word equivocate. And I think it works well for this chapter and kind of elucidate some things that are happening here, since Kaladin does have to play it so close to his vest when it's coming to various things, and Gaz as well has to kind of hide things. So I wanted to kind of guide our conversation through first looking through how Kaladin does things, and then how Gaz does things, because this is believe, our first chapter with the Gaz point of view, which is interesting thinking through. It was interesting rereading the chapter, now having read all 5 books, and where Gaz ends up at the very end, right, is very different than where he is here. And he does have this nice little thread of character growth throughout them. So thinking about Gaz's equivocation, and then thinking at the very end about the positionality of the equivocation and where the characters are positioned in relation to each other. So for part 1 of our conversation, let's focus in on Kaladin. So, Liz, how does Kaladin equivocate with the bridge crew around the side carry, and why do that when they're all in the same situation? Why go it alone, so to speak? Or like, how does Kaladin come out as equivocating in this chapter? I kind of want to focus in on him to begin with.
I think I think equivocation at its core is about minimizing risk. And Kaladin is trying really hard to minimize risk to his crew. When someone asks him, hey, am I going to do this? He pauses. I think he thinks about telling the truth, but he sees Gaz's proximity and he holds back. And he basically is like, I'm not going to tell the full truth because there is a chance we won't get to do this if I tell you the real reason because of what I know about things that have happened in the past. And I think there's also a chance that he's like, I don't want you telling other people about this because I don't want it to not happen. Like, I am placing protecting the bridge crew above being honest or fully honest with the bridge crew because I think that's more likely to protect them. So I think it's like Kaladin is just trying to like minimize risk is what he's trying to do here.
And I think it's both risk to the bridge crew, but also like risk to himself, like not fully committing to the idea in case it doesn't work or it fails. You see this a lot in people who like have ambitions to write a novel or become a writer. But you don't want to tell anyone that you're working on a novel or that like you write poetry because then like you're expected to do something with it. And there's that added pressure that comes with having people know. So he's providing this alternate reason, like, oh, we just want to like experiment and like maybe we can like ease our muscles or something, like provide alternate reasons rather than like, I'm hoping that I can shield you all from death. And if that doesn't work, you're going to be mad at me. So I don't want you to like socially like depend on this. So I'm going to give you an alternate reason and kind of like hide what I hope will work. And I'm not sure it's going to turn out.
I'm curious what we think about that when it comes to like, I'm going to say the morality of it, but in the sense of like, they're all equal footing, right? Kaladin's taken this measure to become the leader of them all in this moment. And he's kind of like subsumed them all under his authority and things like that. So he has this responsibility that he feels. But at the same time, he is technically no different than all of the other bridge crew members. It's someone who has risen above equals and now won't tell them his big project with their life, right? Because this is a big project with their life. Like if he does this, they could all be killed earlier or be killed by Sadeas, right? Or instead of by the Parshendi. And I think it's like such an interesting space to think about leadership in some ways and to think about like responsibility and authority over other people. Because Kaladin is hiding something from people who are his equals in many ways. And he's like not being very open and very democratic with them for all the good reasons that we've mentioned so far in the episode, right? Where it's like revealing it to them may reveal it to other people. Revealing it to them may stop it from happening entirely. But it's also like they're all in the same dirt. And so like in not revealing it, he's doing something that I don't find to be very I find it to be righteous in some ways, right? Because ultimately it does end up really well and he does save lives. And then like he's the only one who's put, so like down the road, it ends up fine. But at the same time, their lives are put on the line because they're bridge crew. But he's putting their life on the line to an extra step in the hope of saving them. But at the same time, he doesn't allow them to know about that. He treats them not as equals. And is there something in there that like becomes icky or perhaps there's like a reason to do that? Or I just want to think through more of that.
I think Kaladin has a bit of a savior complex of like, he not necessarily like because he wants to be the one that saves everyone. He feels like a deep responsibility to be saving everybody. which ends up meaning, so I can't tell them in case that makes them feel bad. I can't do this because otherwise it won't be enough. And I think that's like, that is more like, I don't know that I would say it's immoral so much as I would say Calvin's making a decision very informed by his own like personality without thinking through how it affects everybody. I don't know that Kaladin sees the other bridge crew as fully humans in their own right. Like, he sees them as the bridge crew. And like, I think that really even comes into like how he has personal interactions with them. He almost never like actually has like these really personal ties with people in the bridge crew. It's almost like even years down the road, it's very different. Like, he doesn't have quite the same level of connection with them because his whole focus has been about protecting them rather than like interacting. So I think if he like was willing to be on a peer-to-peer level, I think he could have like had that conversation of, let's think about ways we can be safe. I want to try this one, but that doesn't even like factor in a possibility for him.
I think you're right that Kaladin's protective windrunneriness has a lot to do with it, but I think it also has to do with the way the bridge crew has behaved up to this point, because Kaladin is the only one who's reaching out and trying to build a community. Everyone else is like, no, that's dumb. We don't want to even learn each other's names. Like, there is no, like, there's no polis he's participating in. It's like, to have a democracy, you have to have a community, and there is no community, right? There's just, they're all in it individually. And so we have this quote at the beginning of the chapter that Kaladin says he'd eventually need the men's loyalty, but for now he'd settle for obedience. So it is very much that, like, Kaladin is the one in this situation with initiative, and he's managed to get the bridge crew to be enough of a community that they will follow him, but not enough of a community that, like, he feels like I can trust them with ideas and we can go back and forth and come up with a plan together. As they will later when they, like, start, you know, making their escape plan and going down in the chasms. I think we get there eventually. But I think at this point, he's not to that point with them. He's still very much like, I have decided to protect these people. It's very much I empathize with it as a parent, right? It's a very parental role. And when you're planning out things for kids, if you're planning something that's good that they will like, but might not happen, you're not going to tell them about that. Like, we might stop for ice cream means we are going to stop for ice cream, right? And if we don't, then it's a negative. And so you keep that, you play that close to the vest until, like, you're sure that it's actually going to happen. And then it's like, yay, it worked. And if it doesn't, then they never have to know. And it is very much, he doesn't trust the Bridgemen at this point. And I think there's reasons for that.
It's interesting to think about how, like, for Kaladin's life, so much of his decisions are shaped by, like, his previous trauma, right? Losing his younger brother, losing his, what were they called? His little troop, right? When he was in Amaran's army, then being thrown into slavery, like, all of that has affected him into this moment. And then also the moment of almost, you know, jumping off the cliff and then making a decision to have initiative after that. Like, I think this is why, for me, it's such a generative space, because it's like, it lives in those two minds of, like, Kaladin is the only one taking initiative. At the same time, he's not treating the people around him with, like, the same respect of them being human beings who are also thinkers, because they're also all traumatized by being enslaved in that moment. It just makes me think of, like, when we make decisions to equivocate in our language, when we make decisions to like hide something from someone or not be as forthcoming with someone, like, those decisions are affected by so many things around us, so many influences around us, right? Like, Kaladin here is influenced by, he is the only one taking initiative. He is, like, he won't get out of that unless he takes the initiative. So it is a little bit of a selfish thing, right? He won't survive if they don't do the shield carry. But also everyone else won't survive if they don't do the shield carry type of thing. And so, like, hiding that from them is affected, not just, like, I don't think it's from, like, a negative or a bad, like, approach. And I said moral, and I think for me, moral means, like, just, like, we're weighing the different sides to it, right? Which we're doing really well here. But it's just, like, the reasons we hide things from people are not always nefarious, and they're not always positive in every aspect.
I think like the idea of equivocating, but not necessarily because it's like nefarious, is like really important to pull out from like a personal perspective. Like Kaladin right here, it's not like he's not trying to be intentionally equivocating, at least towards the men, in a way that feels nefarious. It might feel a little bit, I wouldn't say underhanded, but it feels a little weird that he is not doing that in the context, which is why you brought up. I think what's hard for me is like the level of like corporate equivocation that's happening and is like very obvious throughout the entire chapter, from Lameral's discussion with Gaz to Gaz's own internal thoughts to Kaladin's own musings on like why the bridgemen aren't given shields and armor, is like this entire equivocation of what lets a bridgeman free, why do bridgemen not get armor, and like this idea of using them as bait. Like that feels like way permeating the space and is like feels relevant to like corporate speak that I hear in kind of like modern times of like, here's why we're doing this thing that's going to affect you and your privacy. It's hard to hear and to think of like Kaladin's equivocation anywhere near the same level of this massive corporate equivocation, sort of.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the concept of the homo sacer, right? The guy who can be sacrificed from a society, right? And the bridgemen are that. But the Alethi society is not willing to say, you guys are bait, which, you know, Gaz says it in his head, but no one's willing to say that out loud. Like, you are bait so that more useful men don't get killed. Instead, we've got to equivocate and be like, well, we need bridges. And so they're serving a function, and like that, you're very needed. You're very much, that's what your function is, and you're very helpful to the army. We're not going to pay you very much because anybody can do it, but you're very needed, you're very wanted. When it, like, everybody knows, except for Kaladin, who doesn't realize, like, the point is for them to be arrow bait and not for them to place the bridges. That's like secondary to their actual purpose. But we're not willing to say that because, like, they would all jump in the chasm at that point, right? So we have to equivocate to keep the societal system going.
It's hard to then ask, like, of your own life, where do you equivocate, right? Which I think is like what this chapter, thinking about it through the same, invites, but is difficult, right? It's hard to think through that space. Like, what area of my life am I like trying to explain away in some way, or what area of my life am I trying to say like, oh, that's okay, but like really you should be honest with yourself? Because I think there's the thinking about the corporate equivocation and in the group equivocation, somewhat in the character of Gaz, there's personal equivocation, right? I can't read this chapter without thinking about Gaz's, the eventual appearance of the sprint at the side of his vision, right? And that's where they come from in relation to him, like kind of lying to himself that he would wish he had died instead of the eye going away, which I think is one of those lies that he's going to pull out when becoming a Knights Radiant, or, you know, stepping on that way to becoming a squire for Shallan. What do they call it? The Illusion Court, or I forget the name.
Unseen Court.
I mean, which works with the Darkness Unseen, right? For the chapter title and that nice little foreshadowing. But like, I think, again, we're looking at layers of things. Corporate equivocation from the Alethi toward everyone, or at least from Sadeas and his warcamp toward everyone else, and through Lameral. Where Lameral, I can't remember, I don't think I wrote down the exact quote, but like, he's very truthful about it with Gaz, where he's like, yeah, they are just there for arrows. That's all we need them for. And then Gaz is like, oh, I can't tell them that. And there's these layers, right? So they're even aware of that. Then there's that group equivocation of Kaladin, and then there's a personal equivocation with Gaz. I think it's like pulls us into talking more about Gaz, hopefully. What did y'all think about his equivocation, or thinking about his point of view through this idea of equivocate?
I think the other kind of equivocation we see from Gaz, besides like he's lying to himself and he's participating in the society-wide lie that the bridgemen are not just bait, but is the equivocation that happens when there's a differential of power. Gaz does not feel like he can be fully forthright with his opinions to Lameral, because he knows like this guy could get me put onto a bridge crew, so I got to say the right things. I am not going to reveal what I really think. I'm going to say what I think he wants me to say in order to, like, preserve my life and my station in society. And I think we've all interacted with people who are like that, whether, you know, at work or whatever, where you're like, I know that I can't say what I really think about this situation because economic reasons, social reasons. I need to just, like, keep that down and say the right thing for this situation. So we see a lot of that with Gaz. And he gets annoyed because Kaladin doesn't do that back to him, right? Kaladin is not being deferential and participating in that social equivocation that happens when there's a class difference. He just comes out and says, you know, I don't like you. This is what I want. And that's very disconcerting to Gaz, who, like, wants to be on the other side of this hierarchy and is very much not.
Any other thoughts for thinking through Equivocate?
I think, like, from my, like, a personal thought of equivocation, the thing that, like, I thought about was, like, when someone asks, like, how are you? And, like, what do you say when you're not having a good day? And I've, like, adopted, like, a default answer of, oh, I'm alive, which is, like, I mean, to me, that's, like, my own personal code of, like, I am not doing amazing, but I don't want to talk about it unless, like, I feel like I could talk about it with you. So, like, I'm equivocating in, I'm not going to, like, give you a good positive, like, I'm not going to give you your positive response, but, like, the equivocation is actually in, I'm not going to fully tell you how I feel, but I'm, like, trying to be honest in, I'm not fully present in how positive things are going or whatever. And I don't completely want to hide that, but I am, like, reducing the risk of getting hurt by, like, someone misunderstanding what I'm actually feeling. And I think, like, we, like, most of us kind of do that on a regular basis, especially because, like, how are you doing is, like, supposed to be, like, a light level small talk. But I think there are circumstances, like, where it would serve us well to be more honest with how we respond to those conversations and give space for moments of building trust between people. Kaladin telling his bridge crew the reason why he was doing the side carry could have been a moment to build trust with the rest of his crew. But, like, Gaz's presence ended up, like, restricting that moment and, like, making it so that didn't happen because he knew he for sure couldn't trust Gaz. And I don't know, that's just something I'm, like, thinking about of, like, in terms of personal equivocation, where is there space to learn from this chapter?
On kind of a more positive note about equivocation, having this theme in mind made me think of the practice carrying the bridge as equivocation. Like, in order to have good practice at something, you have to pretend like it's real. You can't just, like, be like, well, in the 5K, I will actually run the whole time, but this is just practice, so I'm going to walk. That doesn't work. You have to actually do the thing. And it reminded me a lot of this book by a Canadian astronaut called The Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth, where they talk about the death simulations that astronauts do. And they do a lot of simulating, like, okay, Chris has just died. Who's calling his next of kin? Who knows who that is? And Chris can't talk. And, like, you actually have to think through the whole thing. And, like, the more real you make that, the more useful it is as practice. And the less real you make it, the less it helps you prepare for whatever situation you're practicing with. So it's kind of a kind of equivocation. Like, the more you get into it, even though it's not real, the more useful it is.
All right. I think we're good to move to our sacred reading method, which for this episode is going to be Florilegia, which is a technique of anthologizing different sentences from the sacred text and bringing them together and seeing connections to them. And the way we're going to practice it for this episode is I asked Elle and Liz to bring 2 sentences each, or 2 like sections, 2 verses for the chapter, and I want to smash them all together and see what we get from reading all of these sentences together. So I have them all together here on my screen, and I'm going to just read through them, no context, to see what we see between them, to see what new text appears from our anthology of texts that we've collected here. So these were sentences that stood out to us, sentences from the chapter that connected to us in some way. But I want to think through, how do they all connect to each other, if they are read together as an anthology. So, y'all ready? I'm getting not, so we're ready. All right. The craftsmen want to make bridges that last. The soldiers I listen to, they just want to get to the plateau, grab the gem heart, and get away. It's like a game to them. Being around a man like Lamoral was like handling a hot coal with bare fingers. Bits of quartz in the ground sparkled before him, catching the light, as if the ground were sparking and burning, ready to burst from within. Soon you'll hardly be a sprint at all. You'll be a little translucent philosopher. We'll have to send you off to a monastery to spend your time in deep, important thoughts. It was like trying to choose which claw the chasm fiend would crush you. The bridge crews function as they are, without need for modification. Change can be unsettling.
Well, immediately putting the hot coal and bare fingers next to the bits of quartz in the ground sparkling is interesting. Sparking and burning, ready to burst from within. Like, kind of the whole metaphor of Roshar in general is this light within stone. So, like, solidity, but also, like, fire at the same time going on, which is really interesting.
I was thinking about how, like, the bridge crews are just like a powder keg waiting to happen. Like, if they all found out that they were just there to be that homo sacer, right? That sacrifice. If you found that out, boom. Either a revolt or they're all trying to not do it or something like that. And so they're like so close to being a powder keg that's about to just blow, right? Which I think that really highlights.
I'm thinking about the comment about you'll spend your time in deep, important thought, and like this contrast with like, so like this survival or like all of these other like real day-to-day things are not deep and important. Like the craftsman's work, is that not deep and important? Like, are all of these things not deep and important? Is it just the philosophers in their monastery that are doing deep and important things? And like, I was thinking about that in the idea of like, how much like working class work is overlooked, like on a day-to-day basis, but how absolutely vital and important like that kind of work is. It's not necessarily more important than all of these other things, but like those other like these jobs that we idolize also aren't necessarily lacking in, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. I think someone else probably could word this better.
I think you have a good point there, Elle, that like we somewhat idolize like being the philosopher, being the academic, being the white collar job where you get to spend your time thinking and you're paid for it, as opposed to the bridge runs, the soldiers, the craftsmen building bridges. But it's interesting nowadays that there are a lot of white collar workers who pick up a hobby that is specifically craft oriented, right? Like knitting, gardening, woodwork, like all of these things are coming back into vogue among people who are paid to think all day. They want to work with their hands for fun. And it's interesting because I think to be a complete human being, you need both things, which is interesting in the Kaladin is saying, oh, soon Syl will hardly be a sprint. She's going to be a philosopher. But like, is it a good thing to become only like a thinker? Or does a whole person need more than that? Do we need both parts of ourselves? And is it bad that we've, designated these people are the sacrificial people for our culture who have to do the jobs we don't want to do?
It's also in that Syl later develops more physicality to her, but in this moment, she can't do that physical touching. She can't do that physical creation. And so I think pulling that out kind of shows how our society is very much one or the other basing, right? Like they don't go to the bridgemen to ask anything of them. They just send them out. They give them some money. They let them whore on the weekends. That's about it. They don't go to the craftsman to ask about building better bridges per se. They just say, build a bridge. They don't go to the soldier to ask, like, how could we better approach this thing? They ask the high general who's, achieved that ability to sit back in some ways, who no longer perhaps engages in the middle of battle. And I think that insight of like needing both of those, right? And committing yourself to both of them, right? Like the opposite of equivocation would be fully committing yourself to having the life of a mind and the life of your hands. And whatever way you find that in your life is important, because otherwise we're missing something out from humanity. We're missing something out from what we can give to society. We're missing something out from just, living the short 90, 80, 70 years that we get here in a way that is good. Like, and it has a general goodness to it.
I think it's kind of built into the nature of Rosharan magic system, right? It's very much about the cognitive aspects, the spren needing to be part of the physical realm. And so making this deal with physical beings to access these more cognitive powers. So like the connection between the physical and the cognitive is so important to what the Stormlight Archive is doing in general, because it is all about the interaction between these two realms, the realm of ideas and the realm of physical doing things, of war, right? And like being down in the mud and in the earth and like as close to like physical action as you could possibly be. So that's an interesting connection.
So it's time to turn to our concluding section, which is the Wisdom of the Heralds, in which we think about what we've discussed today and talking about this chapter in relation to equivocation, and what we're going to take into our lives and what wisdom we're going to bring from our reading today.
I think the thing I was thinking about is like the risk in personal equivocation is, on one hand, I don't get emotionally hurt by someone reacting in a way that is negative towards me. But the other risk is that I don't end up opening up to people who I could form a connection with. And so I think I want to try to be more conscious of when I'm personally equivocating and if I really need to do that, or if I can be a little bit less equivocal in how I approach a conversation with someone.
I really like the reading that you guys did of Kaladin not trusting the bridge crew enough to open up to them about his actual plans. And I think this ties into a lot of my other Wisdom of the Heralds, which is about like, I'm moving into this phase where like my kids are no longer like small children who I can't trust with things, but like they're moving into that phase of being fully adults. I will have an adult child in 6 months, which is crazy. And in needing to move to that phase where I can like ask for input on things and be like, I'm feeling like we need more of this. What's your thought? Like, what could we do? Instead of planning things and presenting it as fait accompli, kind of how Kaladin does. So that's been an interesting transition for me. And I'm going to continue trying to improve at that. Like, how can I ask for help and for input and for opinions from people and show that I respect their agency as part of our family?
For me, I'm thinking, and throughout our conversation today about that personal equivocation and how it's so difficult to figure out where you're equivocating for yourself, right? Because it's like, oh, am I really just trying this out rather than just like trying to not commit myself to this? And so I'm like ambiguously trying to deal with it and things like that. And I think I want to try to recognize more in my life where I can fully commit and where if I'm not fully committing, perhaps I need to stop kind of like equivocating to myself and just let that go in many ways. And so where I can find that complete commitment to certain things that I need to do and where I can find the places where I'm like lying to myself, where it's like, I'm never going to be able to do this. I'm never really going to do this. I'm not going to read that book that you told me to read 6 months ago or something, right? Like how can I become a little bit more deliberate in the things that I do, which I think is a little bit the opposite of equivocation.
Thank you for joining us today on The Storming Journey. You can support our work on this podcast by subscribing to our Patreon, leaving a review, or sharing the podcast with a friend. We hope you'll join us next week, and in the meantime, remember, journey before destination.